Hello and welcome to today's AWS Industry Council discussion, a platform for industry leaders to share insights and collaborate. My name is Anurag Saluja and I'm part of AWS retail team. Before we begin, I'd like to start with acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that welcome to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I'm pleased to welcome Gavin, who is a retail industry leader at monday.com, and also like to welcome Brett Raven from Accenture Song. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Today, we are going to cover how monday.com and Accenture Song are helping retail organizations to drive customer centricity through a multi-channel strategy and discuss the retail trends. And my first question for Gavin will be, how do you see the rising cost of living and also the way retailers are responding to it?
Yeah, thanks, Anurag. I think it's an interesting question. I mean, you've got to kind of set the scene as to where we are today. If I look back a couple of years ago, in the height of the pandemic, consumers were obviously doing majority of their shopping and purchasing online. So the experience, the ability to be able to track and look at different costs and look at different offers was in the hands of the consumer. Come to where we are today, consumers have got so many different channels that they can purchase through. So bricks and mortar obviously has seen huge increase in consumer foot traffic back into those channels. So I think, as a retailer, understanding where and how your consumers are purchasing, the behaviour, the thought that they're putting into it, the research they're doing is really important to obviously how they then go to market. So a lot of what we're seeing in the discussions that we're having is that retailers are really trying to understand the path to purchase for their consumers and what that actually looks like in terms of price, position and offers. And it was actually interesting, on the news this morning I heard that a large grocery retailer is actually going to suppress and hold the price. I think it was around 5,000 key products. So to me that says that consumers are at the forefront of everything these retailers are doing. And obviously to your point around, what's happening in the economy and pricing and stuff like that is vitally important. So if I think about something like that, let's say 5,000 SKUs that a retailer is going to have the pricing suppressed on and hold that price, there's a number of different things they're going to have to manage. How do you manage the inventory? How do you manage the path to purchase? Because obviously the consumers are going to be looking for those products, but then other margin-rich products you're going to want positioned correctly as well. So managing the micro and the macro space, and then also looking at heat mapping and stuff like that for retailers, is obviously going to become a key focal point. But then you overlap on the other side of that, all the channels that they've got to market to those consumers via. So I think, the dynamics of how retailers play now in the market is really about servicing the consumer. It's totally flipped from what I saw probably 10 years ago, where it was more about, the retailers being able to put different offers to market and having a loyal customer base. The consumers have so much more information now at their disposals and so many different channels that they're being marketed to that, at the forefront of everything the retailer's doing, it actually has to be about the consumer.
And from a consulting perspective, like given a different business and a different technology focus, how do you see these trends in your side of the fence?
Yeah, it's a good question, Anurag. So through the pandemic, of course, a lot of retailers did very, very well. And what we're seeing at this point is a transition into a bigger investment into their future. So digital transformation has been the thing that we've been talking about for the last 10 years or so, but now we're really getting into areas of reinvention. So these businesses are diversifying into the markets, different markets that they have not been into traditionally before. They're taking the money they've earned through the pandemic and through record sales, especially online sales, and reinvesting that back into things like bricks and mortar, like what Gavin was saying. So it's an interesting time right now. We're seeing that there's a lot of impact in the way that these businesses are operating and how they're trying to keep up with the demands of the consumer. At the moment, consumers are very, very touchy, right? There's no brand loyalty, it seems, in the market. Everybody's shopping with their feet when it comes to price. Inflation's putting a lot of pressure on all the decisions that are being made. So there's an interesting balance in the consulting space to look at how do we help our customers, our clients, and their customers make the right decisions to go forward into the future. And the trick to that, I think, is prioritization and really listening to the signals that are coming from the market.
Right, okay. And when it comes to this pressure on the buying as well as the kind of the cost of living pressure, and then there is a competitive aspect as well to the business. Do you identify certain areas to focus on from a monday.com perspective for customers so that you can really assist them in individual functional areas in retail so that they can continue to serve their own customers in a more effective way?
Yeah, I think, it aligns a lot to what Brett was just saying. It's the priorities. What are the priorities of the business? So, often you've got companies like KPIs or OKRs or key strategic pillars in place. So ultimately, we have this saying at Monday, strategy to execution is key. You can have the best strategy in the world if you can't execute on it and can't measure it and bring teams together, because, as you get bigger and bigger an organisation and different teams doing different things, the silos start to form. So you can have the best strategy and the best ideas. So let's say, for example, the one that I gave there, so want to suppress price on 5,000 key lines, which is great for the consumer. As Brett was saying, there's so much, angst and stuff in the market around what's going on with cost of living. If that's your strategy, then actually executing on it, that is the key. And obviously a lot of what we're doing at Monday and working with our partners is around how do we actually sit down with these retailers. And in a lot of cases, it's bringing different team members together that cross-functionally, yes, they kind of understand what the other teams are doing, but they don't know how they should intersect and work together. So, I think for me, the key thing really is, yes, understanding what the strategy is, but then how do you execute on that? And execute on it and measure as well, because measuring both what's going on internally with an organisation to execute, but then also how that's performing out in market is just as important, because if you can overlap the two together, you can actually say, well, this particular thing that we've executed on internally, look at the results we've got in the market, positive, let's continue to do that. Or sometimes it's the vice versa of that, actually it's not having the results we want, so let's reposition either the expense or the resources that we're putting into that into another area of the business to execute on the overarching strategy.
Okay, got it. So that is interesting because monday.com brings in that particular solution or product which kind of enables the execution aspect of it. How do you enable the organization to adapt that or that particular tool in the organization? How do you work with them?
Yeah, look, that sometimes is the hardest part, right? You can come up with strategies and you can look at all the way your business operates, and Gavin makes a great point about silos in these organizations. And retail traditionally, especially big retail, have lots of silos. They're very, very traditionally operating business. They have hierarchies. They've got different brands, separations between the way that they do logistics and so on. So bringing these teams together to actually work better as an organization is one of the key aspects that we look at for how do we improve operations within an organization, which monday.com can satisfy, right? So by using the platform and using other platforms that we can tie into it or integrate to it, you can create that workflow. And it's probably a word that's been overused in our industry for a long time, but it really actually does mean that you can have information and work flowing between different teams, breaking those silos down and getting that multiplier effect for the change that you're trying to make.
Great. Okay, that's good. And what about your time to benefit? So, for example, if you have chosen a particular hot use case, let's say a multi-channel campaigning or a store-based execution of a task or a particular project, what's your typical time to market and time to benefit for that particular customer?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. I think most decisions that are made now is they want to see value as soon as they can. The sign-off process that a lot of these customers have to go through now is different to what it was a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, you get approval probably at a divisional level. A lot of decisions now are flying up to the C-suite or higher to make a decision on that expense. And I heard a really interesting statement made yesterday by a CFO. It was like, I get a lot of proposals come to me. The proposals say we're going to get a 20% reduction, for example, in what those teams are going to have to do. His statement back was, well, unless you can tell me what they're going to do with that 20% save time, I'm not signing off on it. So I think a lot of it's a double thing. So time to value, we often look at that in terms of how can we roll out a POC. Because at Monday, we actually stand to try and solve use cases and then grow from there. So really it's about looking at individual use cases. You mentioned there, let's say it's a retailer looking at range review. How do they manage the range review process? Often when we sit down with our consulting partners, that could be a magnitude of different things they're working from. So it could be an 80-tab spreadsheet, for argument's sake, where every time something comes into that, they have to make a manual adjustment. And then I see the anxiety on the person's face. If I adjust something here, is it going to break something else behind it? So how do we take something that's so integral to how they operate as a business and build it out into Monday and show them that they're going to get benefits from it and then operationalise that quickly, the focus is really about building out a POC. So how do we understand how they work today? How can we actually take that and put that into Monday and then play that back to them, and then they've got the level of comfort to say, yes, okay, this makes sense, we're going to roll it out. So we've done that with a couple of large retailers where their range review process prior to Monday was actually very manual in terms of how they did things. And I love one of the examples that they give, and we have got a video testimonial coming out about this from Officeworks. Prior to Monday, their clock department would issue a range review update every time a range review was requested. They'd manually have to then go and look at the data to understand and say, well, actually our stock turns on clocks aren't that high. The time that we'd have to invest to putting a new clock on range is actually not going to benefit in a positive margin return for us. So that would say take 3 to 4 plus hours to do that, manually to do it. Now within Monday, they get the request, they look at the data, they can make a decision in literally a couple of minutes to say, great, this new clock looks fantastic, but doesn't make sense to put a new one on range.
So that's really interesting because you're using data-led decisions, really, which is more kind of tangible and more reliable decisions. But for a consulting kind of setup, it's important that a change which is brought into a retail environment, it's across people, process, and technologies.
Yeah.
So how do you enable the organizations to make sure that these changes which are brought in are long-standing?
Yeah, look, Anurag, change is always difficult, right, in these organizations, and you could have the best ideas and produce the best business cases, and you know, the C-suite are kind of tired of these things, as you can see now, as what Gavin was saying. But you need to change, you need to affect the change from the top, really. So you build a culture of change and acceptance to move through the modifications to the way the business will operate. So it needs to be really driven by leadership, but it also needs to be driven by priority and by business value. So ultimately, and I think Gavin was alluding to this as well, the businesses need to see value quickly and they need to see it often. And I think a land and expand approach to some of these platforms and capabilities is the way to go with these businesses. So don't expect to do these, you know, multi-million-dollar 6 to 12-month projects anymore. Do a 2 or 3 month project, engage a certain team, show success, and then expand that success by example through the rest of the organization. Yeah. And that's really where we're seeing a lot of the momentum now is change comes with proven success.
Absolutely right. That sums up actually our overall conversation today. With that, we have reached the end moment of our discussion today. Thank you very much, Gavin and Brett, for your time today. Really appreciate your insights and the valuable thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us in this session today. We hope that you have enjoyed the session and you've been able to gather some insights to apply to your businesses. Please reach out to monday.com or Accenture Song if you need help in driving customer centricity through a multi-channel strategy. Thank you once again. Good day. Thank you, gentlemen.